Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 12, World War II in Europe, 1939 to 1942. So, I think I say this at the start of every lecture. I'm not going to promise this is a short one. I'm not sure how long it's going to be. So, just right there. I am kind of a World War II buff. This is a huge topic. To do the first 3 years of the war in one lecture is an impossibility, of course. So we're just going to hit the important highlights. There's, of course, much more to the story. And we do fortunately have a two-part lecture because next week will be on the second half of the war. But in any case, let's go ahead and pick up here with World War II begins in Europe. So, some iconic images there at the start of the war. The German army, the German military, is very good, and they're going to stun and shock the world, as we'll see here in a minute. Before that, though, in the days leading up to the start of the war, there was another event that profoundly shocked many people in Europe, and that is Hitler and Stalin. Let me highlight this for you guys. There we go. Hitler and Stalin signed a non-aggression pact in August 1939. The reason why this is so stunning, as you guys know from the previous lecture talking about the Spanish Civil War, many people on the left, whether that's socialists, communists, anarchists, so forth, viewed Stalin and communism as the most potent, formidable force to combat fascism. The feeling for many on the left was that the liberal democracies, say in France or Britain, are not strong enough to actively confront fascism. And again, they'd point to the Civil War in Spain, where the liberal democracies of Western Europe stayed neutral, whereas the only major force ideology that gets directly involved to help the Spanish Republic is going to be Stalin's Russia. And their interpretation, their takeaway is only communism has perhaps the will and the strength and the foresight to directly combat fascism in the form of Nazi Germany and fascist Italy under Mussolini. And then suddenly, that narrative is flipped completely on its head because in August 1939, to surprise again, because it's no secret, this stunning new pact between Stalin and Hitler, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed October 20, 1939, in which Nazi Germany and Russia promised to have non-aggression pact with each other. Now, not as clearly stated, at least to the public, is also a decision to divide up portions of Eastern Europe. That part is not released to the public, of course, but Russia and Stalin, looking to the near future, decide they're going to divide up Eastern Europe between the two of them. Russia, as you guys know, the Soviet Union already controls portions of Eastern Europe, but now they want to, even to a greater extent, for example, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, for example, they control them, and Russia will also, or Stalin, or Soviet Union will also take the eastern portion of Poland when war comes shortly. Now, again, that's not publicly announced to the world. That's really a secret pact between the two of them. But when it's starting to the world, though, and that does go public, is a non-aggression pact. Again, a lot of people on the far left are stunned by this because they've been thinking, again, that Stalin, that communism is the only force that's willing to aggressively combat fascism. And now suddenly Stalin, the leader of the communist world, and you have Hitler, the leader of, well, at least European leader of the fascist world, now have a peace treaty with each other. Now, as you can imagine, neither side is naive. This peace treaty is simply to buy time. I think both Stalin and Hitler, neither one of them had the illusion that conflict and war will not come at some point. Probably both of them are clearly aware of that. But both of them, for their own reasons, for their own motives, feel like in the short run, it's useful for both of us to have this agreement of non-hostility to each other. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And I do have some tea here. And also to divide up Eastern Europe between the two of them. And that's shortly what happens. Remember, that was in August 39, the next month, actually beginning of the month. So this is within a couple weeks. September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. Now, the Germans had some red flag where the Poles attacked the German border unit, and some Germans were killed. By the way, that was done by German special forces. The Poles had not done that. That's simply a false flag to give some kind of fig leaf justification for Germany's invasion of Poland. So German tanks and soldiers and planes pour into Poland. Poland, by the way, did fight quite hard. Now, Poland does not have the same level of modern planes. They have relatively few tanks. The tanks they have are quite light and small. So technologically, when it comes to military weapons, the Poles are at a huge disadvantage fighting the Germans. But, and importantly, but the Poles are very proud of their nation, of course, and they did fight quite hard. So this was not an easy rollover. When I was younger, I thought the Germans just simply kind of rolled into Poland. That's not the case. They did roll into Poland, but the Poles did fight quite hard. I give an example of the technology. That on the left would be the common Polish fighter at the start of the invasion of Poland on the left, and that is the common German fighter on the right. And there's no comparison technologically between those two planes. The one on the left, for its time period in the early 30s, probably a pretty decent fighter. But by 1939, it's tremendously outclassed by the much more modern German fighter, the Bf-109 there on the right. And that's just kind of indicative of a German technological superiority in most areas, not entirely, but in most areas over the Polish forces, which have a much more limited budget and are not prepared with the equipment they really need for this war. Despite that, they do fight quite hard. To complicate things, as you guys know from the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, Russia, Soviet Union, invades eastern Poland during the same invasion. So not only are the Poles grappling with the German Nazi invasion into Western Poland, as the days tick by, the Soviet Union under Stalin will also invade into eastern Poland. And Poland will be caught in a terrible pincer movement by both sides. And you can see that on this map here on the left. You can see the German, the blue arrows moving into Poland. Then you can see the red arrows as the Russians put in. And as planned, according to plan, the two sides divide up Poland between the two of them. The Germans take Western Poland, and Stalin takes Eastern Poland. Of course, this is the beginning of a nightmare. That's why I included that photograph on the right. That's a young girl with the body of her 14-year-old sister who was killed by a strafing attack by the German Luftwaffe, or German Air Force. Of course, that is the reality of warfare, as we know, and this is the beginning of the nightmare, which we know is World War II, in this case in Poland. Obviously, for the very large Jewish population in Poland, to have the arrival of the Nazis in the western portion of Poland is just the beginning of a nightmare. We'll talk about that more in the later lecture. But Poland, in general, is viewed by Hitler with not just disdain. I'd say despises would be the right word. Hitler despises the Poles, sees them as simply another subhuman Slavic race. And his anger toward the Poles will only increase as the war goes on. The Warsaw Ghetto Rising, both the Jewish one and later on the Warsaw Uprising, both of those would be good examples of that, and German response to that, which militarily made no sense, but just indicative of German disgust with the Poles on a racial level. Again, this Nazi ideology, and at some point, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but at some point, Hitler's vision is the Poles as a people will cease to exist. Not simply, not their independence, that's clearly happened right now with the invasion of Poland, but their actual living as a people they will cease to exist. There's a cartoon that came out not long after this in the U.S. newspaper showing Hitler and Stalin beating each other over the body of Poles, and that's pretty apt depiction of what took place in the invasion of Poland, of Hitler and Stalin both agreeing to partition Poland. Following this is that winter. Europe quiets down a bit. By the way, I need to back up for a minute. I'll back up here just for a minute, because I mentioned this in my notes, but I did not verbally go over this, and I should. Following the invasion of Poland, France and Britain give Germany an ultimatum, which is get out of Poland or face war with us. Now, remember, Chamberlain had famously hoped that by appeasing Hitler, that perhaps giving up the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, that perhaps somehow that would prevent what is going to happen, which is a terrible war. So maybe in a sense, I guess Chamberlain bought France and England a year, although I think certainly the Germans benefited that more than France and England. But that promise of peace in our time obviously goes up in smoke September 1st, 1939, when the German tanks roll into Poland. Chamberlain, reluctantly, but feels he has no choice, declares war on Germany following Germany's refusal to immediately get out following the ultimatum. And that means France and Britain now at war with Germany. Now, here's what is really odd. You see the phony war. I highlighted it for you guys. The phony war begins. The phony war begins means even though from September 39, there's very little direct combat between Germany, France, and Britain all through the late summer into fall, into winter of 39 and into 1940 early. So you would hardly know there's a war on. You could be in Paris, you could be in London. Neither city is being bombed yet. Both countries are technically at war with Germany, but you would hardly know it. I think the point of that was France and Britain decided to adopt a defensive strategy. They think that France, with its large armies and fortified frontier, is in a much better place to defend themselves. And so even though they're at war with Germany, you'd hardly know it. We're not saying no one died. There's still some limited aerial battles, things that take place. So, you couldn't deny it all there's a war, but it is an odd, to some degree, not some degree, to a considerable degree, calm. All that late summer, fall, because Great Britain and France do not take aggressive offensive action against Germany. And Germany's busy consolidating its invasion of Poland and preparing for its attack on Western Europe the next spring. So things are relatively quiet. That's why it doesn't even seem like a war. That's where you get the moniker or the name phony war. And I want you guys to know that as, again, just saying you seem quiet. Seems odd. We're at war. But again, you're in London, you're in Paris, you're in Marseille, you're in Liverpool. You would not know it outside the fact you soldiers walking around and stuff. But, yeah. Okay. Now, while the phony war is going on, another very intense, although relatively short conflict breaks out in Eastern Europe. This is when Russia decides it wants to annex parts of Finland, its immediate neighbor. Now, the irony of this is, as you guys know, with the current war in Ukraine, Finland has just recently joined NATO. There's a long story of this relationship between Finland and Russia. We're not going to get into all that story, but in the context of the late fall of 39, Stalin feels like he needs to have portions of Finland given to him, and he does not get to take no for an answer. Almost, by the way, it's almost a chilling secondary example of Hitler turning Czechoslovakia into demanding Sudetenland. Now, he's doing that because ethnic Germans were there in large numbers. That's not really Russia's exact argument, but they feel like they need this border area from Finland. Finland is not willing to give up any territory to Stalin's Russia, the Soviet Union, and that leads to Stalin deciding to take the issue into force, and that is to compel the Finns by simply seizing this disputed land that Russia is, or Soviet Union is now wanting or claiming. And of course, Finland is saying no. It's referred to as the Winter War, once you guys know that title. It takes place from November 39 and goes all the way into March 1940. Called the Winter War because that's what it was, especially you guys in the northern latitudes and in the Arctic where this took place. It was a winter war. And by the time the temperature was just beginning to change, the war had already come to an end. Now, this is really a tale of David versus Goliath. Of course, Stalin is, and the Soviet forces are Goliath. David, of course, is the plucky, nationalistic, hard-fighting Finn. Well, I'm sorry. Here's my tea. I'm ready for that one. Okay. But unlike in the biblical version, David Goliath, David doesn't exactly win this one, although maybe psychologically in a sense they do. The Russian army is vastly, vastly larger than the Finnish army for obvious reasons. The Russian population, power, military equipment. is infinitely superior to a relatively small population, which makes up Finland. The difference, though, of course, is Finland is fighting for home, whereas the Russian soldiers are not. They're on the same motivation, and the training varies dramatically from person to person. The Finns do not have a lot of heavy weapons. They're not the best armed, but they're extremely motivated. Again, maybe a little bit like Ukraine, although there'll be some important differences in Ukraine. Ukraine is much, much larger in population and strength than Finland was in this time period. So Finland really has an uphill battle to try to hold on its territory with the small populations it has and the lack of a lot of heavy military equipment. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have some. They, of course, had some. But what the Finns did have is extreme patriotism, being very prepared for the winter temperatures. Now, you think the Russians would be too, right? But I'd say the Finland's even to a greater degree, frankly, even though the Russians, many of them may reach cold temperatures too. But the Finns are ideally suited by temperament, by the sports mentality of the Finnish culture, obviously by the love of Finland. And so when it comes to skiing, for example, ski soldiers fighting in freezing or sub-zero conditions, surviving in those terrible conditions, the Finns are frankly much better prepared than many of the Russians on the poor Russian conscripts who are simply put in these military convoys of tanks and trucks and so forth, put on roads to invade into Finland. And to the astonishment of the Russians or the Soviets and to much of the world, during the early part of fighting, you can see it here on this map right here, the Finns get the upper hand in these battles and do very, very well. In fact, they capture large numbers of Russian soldiers. Many Russian soldiers are killed in these large-scale ambushes. Russia, frankly, is humiliated in the early stages of this war. And the Finns, frankly, are winning. But, of course, sadly, numbers tell, right? And Finland, being a relatively small country, does not have a large population. And Stalin, even though the initial attacks went quite badly, poorly, bloodily, soldiers freezing to death, being gunned down in these ambushes, Stalin has an immense manpower reserve to draw from, and the Finns don't. So Stalin does not give up despite early embarrassing, I'd say, humiliating losses and incompetent defeats. But Stalin does not give up and fires some generals, gets some new generals, gets more reservists called up, brings in more soldiers to the front, and eventually those overwhelming numbers will begin to tell. Eventually the Finns realize our attempt to defend all of our country is going to fail under the weight of all this military hardware and all these men. And Finland, realizing that's the case, feels like they have no choice but to acquiesce to Stalin's territorial demands, and the war will be negotiated and come to an end. And Russia will simply take these border regions, which you see right here, and at there as well too. It's a very high cost. I'm not sure Russia got the best deal. They did get some territory, which they wanted. How helpful that was to Russia. Create a buffer zone against what is going to be Nazi Germany in the not too distant future. I don't know, maybe the military historian have an opinion at that. Certainly Russia paid a very, very high price for these territorial gains from Finland on the Finns. Even though, again, they did lose territory, but I think they did walk away with a lot of pride that they had fought, at least for a time, the Russian bear to a standstill for a time, despite their being exceptionally outnumbered. Now, while that winter war is taking place, oh, by the way, one thing I want to differentiate there, Finland was given some assistance, but not a lot. The international community felt bad for the Finns, and they were given a limited amount of military assistance, but nothing in a serious way. So that's quite unlike what Ukraine is experiencing right now in fighting Putin's Russia. As you know, Ukraine currently has had a large influx of weapons, and very good weapons, high-grade weapons from the United States, the European Union, and so forth. Additionally, Ukraine has a much larger population percentage-wise compared to Russia. And of course, Ukraine still is at a disadvantage when it comes to manpower against Russia, but the ratio is not nearly stark as it would be Russia compared to Finland. All right, meanwhile, the Cold War, the phony war continues. So, following the eventual conquest of Poland, things in Europe quiet down for a time. Now, it's a very busy time. Germany is building new weapon systems, getting ready for the mass offensive coming in spring. The Allies, the British and French, of course, they're also developing new weapons and getting ready, but they have in mind a defensive strategy. They're hoping to let Germany make the first move, and they'll let Germany, like a wave, break on the very strong French defenses, and that is their strategy. Now, as we'll see here shortly, that strategy is not going to work well for France and the Western Allies. But they, of course, would not know that until a bit later. The first sign, though, of the avalanche of Nazi armies arriving in Western Europe is going to be the German invasion of Denmark and Norway, which took place from April 8 to June 10, 1940. Denmark probably never had a chance. You guys know it's a relatively small country, relatively small population, geographically connected to Germany. So there's not really much of a chance that Denmark can mount more than a token resistance. Norway is a bit different. Now, again, Norway has some significant challenges. Their population is relatively small compared to Germany. They do not have a large military. They don't have a lot of what I call high-grade military weapons. But what the Norwegians do have, of course, though, is they do have some distance, and it's more difficult for Germany to invade Norway. And just like the Finns, the Norwegians are living the outdoor life is a big part of what they do. And I like that photograph you guys have in front of you. Shows both French and Norwegian cross-country ski troops. So again, in the winter fighting, which again would take place there, although it's going to move into summer, Norway and the Norwegian army, small that is well placed to offer at times some serious resistance. Again, they're tremendously handicapped though by they don't have a lot of high-grade military weapon systems. For example, modern planes, modern bombers, fighter planes. They don't have tanks. They don't have a lot of the implements of modern warfare you would need to try to put up a serious resistance. They do have good ski troops. They have some very brave soldiers. But from the get-go, they're really in a tremendously difficult situation facing the combined armed might of Nazi Germany. And you see an example of that on the left there with the German cruiser Admiral Hipper landing German soldiers there in Trondheim during the invasion. If you guys are curious about this topic, I have some recommendations for you guys. My son and I just watched that video on Netflix on the left called The Battle of Narvik. I got you the... That's not an English version. But in any case, if you guys go on the Netflix, you're curious, I recommend you call The Battle of Narvik. So Narvik is what you put in Netflix. I recommend to you guys for extra credit. It's quite good. 12th Man is also good. I recommend that to you too. Also on German invasion of Norway. The King's Choice, about the royal family in Norway, what they could do. Are they going to capitulate to the Germans? Are they going to cooperate with the Germans? Are they going to resist? What's that going to look like? And then on the right, and again, another, interestingly, a number of these are all about Norway. They just came out recently. On the right there, about Norwegian sailors and some families back home during this war and how that was for Norway, this grueling war was for Norway. Any of those would be a very good choice to you. The 12th Man, I think I watched that on Netflix. You could try Amazon too. The King's Choice, same thing. I think that was on Netflix or Amazon. Maybe it's Amazon, one of those. And War Sailor, that's clearly, there's a red N on that. That's clearly Netflix. So I recommend some of you guys. Again, Norway is not, at least I'd say in the United States, not a civil war struggle against the Nazi occupation. Any of these would be a good choice to give you a bit of feel for what that terrible conflict was like for Norway directly. I mentioned France. France, at the start of the war, when they declared war along with England against Nazi Germany, during the phony war, things are quite quiet. And the reason why is France had put a lot of time and effort into protecting France based on the terrible World War I. As you guys know, a lot of World War I was actually fought on the territory of France. Almost none of World War I was actually fought on German territory. The vast majority of the bloodletting was in France, although some in Belgium and the places too, of course, as you guys, the Middle East, Russia, obviously, and Eastern Europe, Ukraine. But in the West, a lot of the fighting and the terrible destruction actually took place on French soil. So aware of that, between the wars, France puts a lot of thought into how do we protect ourselves from a resurgent Germany. And clearly when Hitler takes over, that's no longer theoretical, like it could happen. No, there's tremendous worry in France of what Hitler's bringing to the table. And rightly so, as you guys know, rightly so, they're deeply concerned. And so France puts a great deal of effort into fortifying its border with Germany by creating one of the most powerful fortified lines ever constructed in the modern world, certainly, and that'd be the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line is a series of very sophisticated, well-constructed forts and strong points all along here. You see that red line between the border between France and Germany. Again, we use with aerial bombardment, large artillery. They realize you can't have an old school fort. It has to be something that's quite high tech to protect itself from heavy shelling and planes and so forth. So that's what they did. They designed a very high tech, very resistant, strong, fortified line where you have these gun turrets you see here on top of on the land, and then beneath that you have extensive tunnel systems that provide air shafts, ammunition, resupply, the crew for the guns, and so all those things that supply the power, everything those guns need. And these forts are very strongly protected, as you guys see from this cutaway. They never got quite to the level you see depicted here, and this is more aspirational, what they hope to turn into. But there's no question, though, the Maginot was a very powerful fortification. The photograph you have here on the right shows you some of the Maginot Line guns on top of a ridge there. That photograph on the left shows you some more guns in the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line was very impressive, so impressive that when the Nazi planners and the German Wehrmacht and the German army are looking at invading France, they decided it would make no sense to try to break through the Maginot Line. It sounds awful bloody, and they don't. So, but to the chagrin of France, and to some degree England and Western Europe, who had relied on the Maginot Line, Germany, realizing the power of this Maginot Line and not wanting to try to confront that and lose many men dying trying to capture this line, Germany does something completely unexpected, which we'll get to here shortly. That takes us to a term you guys want to know about, Blitzkrieg, which is German for the lightning war. So, and you guys had, I don't think I signed this to you guys, but if you could, in your textbook, you can read one of the German military theorists, Heinz Guderian, who was laying out his philosophy of how Germany is thinking for the next generation of warfare. Germany wisely reading the technology, they say war movement, see modern planes, modern tanks, trucks, half-tracks, so forth. That because of modern technology, and it allows it to project military force rapidly through the air, also on the ground, that this new mobile warfare will be very different than the very traditional positional structure you had in the fighting in World War I. We have men in a trench, and they charge back and forth in these bloody maelstroms of machine gun fire and artillery fire. And the typical day movement is in yards at most. But the German military theorists are like, but does not the airplane, does not modern trucks and tanks and armored cars, track vehicles, don't they rapidly reorder how the next war is to be fought, and they base their calculations for the next war on these new technologies? France, unfortunately, does not. Doesn't mean that France doesn't have new technologies. They have some new planes and tanks and so forth. But their way to use them and their conception of how the war is going to play out is so deeply rooted in World War I psychologically, intellectually. The Germans, though, of course, are thinking next war. What is this technology's potential? Rapid warfare. So let me highlight that for you guys. So that is what the Germans are going to design. They're going to employ a rapid style warfare, which we call today Blitzkrieg, as they would have too. And it's going to be highly effective. So instead of advancing maybe 100 yards on a very good day in World War I, maybe a German spearhead led by dive bombers and fighter bombers and reconnaissance planes. On the ground, you have tank columns supported by half-tracks and trucks bringing up the infantry and the supplies. Some of these, if they break through the front lines, they might go 60, 70 miles in just simply one day. That is inconceivable in the world of World War I. Just nothing like that was remotely possible in World War I in most situations. But in World War II, in this war movement, That is the goal, and that will take place in some of the fighting there in northern France and Belgium. Eventually, the Allies do catch up with this, and they'll replicate this too as the war goes on, so they do learn. But at the start of the war, I'd say in general, the Allies are completely unprepared to deal with this next generation style warfare. Not that their equipment's not good, but the mentality that controls how the fighting takes place, that is where the Germans are light years ahead of the French and British at the start of fighting. I mentioned that German General Heinz Guderian, there he is on the left. He's a theoretist who's taking a look at the potential of these new technologies. See some German dive bombers right there, and realizing because of tanks and so forth, that there's a radically different style of warfare than we had 20 years ago during World War I. There's an example of a German armored column moving forward. You see the tanks here, and you can see support trucks and so forth there in the background. German dive bombers. All these people working together. For example, you have some German tank column come up. Maybe there's a French ambush head up there with some anti-tank guns and artillery. So German tanks come up to that. Maybe they get stopped temporarily, but they call in an airstrike. German dive bombers arrive, you see right here, and they eliminate that French stronghold. Then the tanks start rolling forward again. That's what the Germans are going to do. The Maginot Line, which is here, the Germans realize correctly they're probably very bloody, perhaps futile, try to bash their way through that. They simply go around it. They go through the Ardennes forest there in Belgium, which the French and the Belgians and the British had not foreseen as being territory that would allow large-scale movement of men, tanks, and trucks. They're wrong, the Germans are right, and they're able to blast their way through that, and it's like a dam bursting, flow rapidly toward the coast. Now, even though most of France at that time was still yet not captured, most of the British and French soldiers got caught up here in Belgium. That's what's going to lead to, famously, as you guys know, Dunkirk, because many British French soldiers are trapped in this pocket right here. Of course, the German army is also up in here, too. That's why they're trapped and they'll rapidly flee to the coast. You can even see it written in there, Dunkirk, when they flee to the coast, because now they're cut off because German armies have already cut them off from central France. The Germans will rapidly roll over France to the shock and astonishment of the entire world, frankly. No one, of course, more than the Belgians and the French, who immediately feel the impact of this as you see German soldiers marching into Paris. You can see the Arc de Triomphe there in the background. The world's stunned by this. Stunned is probably an understatement. Just aghast, maybe that'd be a better word. Just floored by this. Cannot believe it. Such scenes like this go around the world following the conquest of Paris. Hitler, who had never been to Paris but always wanted to go, makes an early morning, brief, high-speed tour of Paris. You see him standing in front of the Eiffel Tower there. That's an iconic image. So is the one on the right. It shows French citizens there watching the German army march the streets of Paris and just being, yeah, that man's face, that one's face in the background says all you need to say. Just, you see the tears in their eyes and on their cheeks, just humiliated, worried, crushed. How could we have fought successfully for all those years in World War I and now World War II in 6 short weeks? France is humiliated and defeated. How is that possible? It wasn't because France didn't have a large army. They did. It wasn't because they didn't have modern equipment. They did. And they'd even prepared for the wars. You guys saw with the Maginot Line. They poured millions and millions of dollars, French dollars, into that very high-tech, well-thought-out defensive line. And it's all for naught. It's all for naught. That's another topic that's important that emerged from the stunning swiftness of these German victories. And that's a term I want you guys to know, and that is fifth column. Now, ironically, this term emerges from, I guess ironically, maybe fittingly, it's another offshoot of the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War, one of the nationalist generals, one nationalists are trying to successfully besiege and capture Madrid, which they would not do till the end of the war. As they're trying to use psychological warfare against Republicans who are still holding bravely, holding on to Madrid. A nationalist general on the radio broadcast into besieged Madrid that's being fought and bravely held on by Republican forces. This nationalist general, to played with them psychologically, the defenders of Madrid, told them there are 4 powerful nationalist armies getting ready to descend upon Madrid and crush you. You think you're prepared for that, but what you're not prepared for is internally, inside Madrid itself, we have a secret 5th column. We have 4 columns attacking. There's 4 armies. There are 4 columns. But we have a secret 5th column who lives among you inside Madrid, behind your defensive lines. And when the time is right, that internal 5th column of secret loyalists who pretend to be Republicans because they're Republican-controlled Madrid, but actually they're loyalists. And when we give them a signal, they'll suddenly rise up internally. So as these 4 armies or columns attacking Madrid internally in the middle of your defenses, the man or the woman who you thought is a loyal Republican will suddenly attack a police station or throw a bomb or cut the telegraph lines or whatever, some act of sabotage, some act of combat internally. So 5th column will come to mean, by the way, that didn't really happen that way in the siege of Madrid in the Spanish Civil War. But the fact that he mentioned that as a psychological tool to alarm the Republicans was quite effective. So effective that that word is actually entered into the worldwide consciousness by the time of World War II. 5th column translates to an ethnic or national minority who lives among a host nation, but even though they appear to be a loyal member of that host nation, in reality they're not a loyal member of that nation, and they're waiting for the signal for them to attack internally. In this case, obviously, the context this would be like a German national, a German person of German ethnicity who moves to France, becomes a French citizen, learns to speak French, by all practical purposes is a loyal, well-functioning French citizen. But secretly, because his ancestry is German, and he's been contracted by the German military or secret police or intelligence services, and then when the time is right, the seemingly loyal French citizen, who was formerly a German immigrant, will show his true colors by attacking France internally, because his true loyalty is to Nazi Germany, not to the host immigrant nation, which is France. And this term 5th column awakens tremendous fear in Europe, and oftentimes we use as an explanation for Hitler's extremely rapid advance to Western Europe, which again stunned the world. Now, for the sake of our class, I'm not going to get into this, but if you guys want the Japanese-American tournament here in the United States, a lot of that has its genesis and origin in 5th column fears in America. Now, obviously, there's racism toward Asian people. Absolutely. That's a larger context. A long history of anti-racism, anti-Asian racism in the United States. But in the context of World War II, the Japanese-American internment, the 5th column rumors, beliefs, fears rolling out in Europe will also infect the United States and play a central role in one of our great injustices against our Japanese-American brothers and sisters when they were interned at the start of World War II following Pearl Harbor. The larger point of this, probably you see a Trojan horse there, because again, that's kind of what this is about, this kind of idea. The larger point is you have many stories of this emerging from Europe, that some Dutchman or Dutchman or Frenchman or Frenchwoman, or Norwegian, whatever the case may be, that they seem to be a loyal national, but in reality they're German. That's their ancestry, that's their true secret identity, and that when the attack came, they rose up and attacked the host nation. Now, did this happen? Important question. But the idea it could happen is separate from did it happen. I think the answer to that is a bit complicated. I would say there were reports of some individuals doing sabotage actions like this. I'd say in general, though, in the context of the reporting done at the heat of the moment in World War II, a lot of the reports that came out of Europe were grossly exaggerated, that this was a big reason for German success. That is significant. For example, German population living in France rose up against their French neighbors, fellow citizens, and attacked them on behalf of Nazi Germany. I think largely that's not true, but there are isolated incidents of that, and there are some examples of this. So it was not probably like the ace card that made Hitler's invasion successful. I think no historian will argue that. Was in some instances where small-scale examples is helpful? And the answer was yes, it was for the Germans. Okay. Let me give you an example of this. I want you guys to know this one. So, again, sometimes there was some reality to this. Now, usually the fear level and the rumors that you guys know in the war grossly exaggerate the impact and importance of real German fifth column activity in the nations they're attacking. But, like just how history can be, there can be nuance and complexity. There was some examples of this. The most famous by far would be in Norway, where Vidar Quisling, who is a Norwegian politician, and that's him right here. So he's a Norwegian politician, but very sympathetic to fascism. When I say sympathetic, basically he's a fascist himself too. And he believes that the fascist philosophy is way of the future. So Norway needs to get on board with fascism as espoused by Nazi Germany. That even means align with Nazi Germany. And when the Germans get ready to invade, Vidar Quisling is part of that. So he's communicating secretly with them. Is it traitorous? Yes, it is. Traitorous. So he's communicating with them ahead of time. He is actively working to sell out Norway to the Nazi invasion. Now, when the Germans do rapidly take over Norway, again, it's not just because of him. He played a role, and certainly he was actively in favor of the Nazi takeover, thought he would become the new leader of a Nazi-controlled Norway. He'd be kind of the puppet leader of Norway. That did not happen. The reason why that did not happen is the Germans quickly realized that the Norwegians hated Vidar Quisling. Even though he's Norwegian, as you guys know, but they all viewed him as a traitor. The Germans are like, as strange as it seems, they prefer to see a German military governor over Norway than Vidar Quisling, who is Norwegian, because they hate him, because they all view him as a traitor, which he was. The reason I'll mention that is because he was a relatively high-level government official, and it turns out he was secretly working with the Germans in their invasion plans and participated in that. This stokes fear through the rest of Europe that is Germany give a similar playbook in our nations, that you have high-level government officials who are working secretly with the Germans to lead to the downfall and destruction of our nation. All right, let me show you some maps here before we get to the end here of our lecture. So you can see Germany's early advance in the war are exceptionally successful. You can see they took over Norway and Denmark, and then in the spring of 1940, they took over Western Europe. That'd be France. Of course, they are allied with Italy. That's in part because of the time I get into it. Eventually, Italy's going to move into North Africa. Germans will follow them there. Italy will also push into today what is Greece, and into today would be Croatia and Serbia and all that, which would be Yugoslavia. I don't know you guys Yugoslavia. They're already allied with Bulgaria and Romania, but Yugoslavia and Greece was a different story. But the German and Italian armies further rapidly roll in and take over Greece as well. Following Hitler's seizure of nearly all of Western Europe, now the question remains what's going to happen to England. England is stunned. They lost a lot of equipment in the Battle of France, which the French, of course, lost. And now Britain is wondering, are we going to be invaded? And Hitler certainly is thinking about it and planning for it. Now, invading England is not easy, as you guys know, thanks to this big blue thing right here, which is the English Channel. Never been easy to invade England. It's happened sometimes, but it's always been difficult. It's additionally difficult because the British Royal Navy is quite large and significantly stronger than the Nazi Navy. So the German Navy cannot fight a stand-up fight against the Royal Navy. They're going to lose that fight. So if you plan to invade England, you have to deal with the Royal Navy first, because the Nazi Navy, the German Navy, is simply the Kriegsmarine, as they call it, is not big enough to take on the Royal Navy, and obviously have to do that to cross water. But Hitler thinks he has an ace up his sleeve, which is a very large and capable German Air Force. That with the German Air Force, they can reduce England to a weakened state, they can deal with the Royal Navy, and having taken out England's air defenses, having dealt with the Royal Navy, under the umbrella of protective air cover of German Air Force planes, then the Germans could actually cross the channel, because the Royal Navy would already be at the bottom of the channel or sunk in other places and could no longer prevent an invasion. But still, Hitler realized it's not easy, so there was even thought of, well, maybe we get England to just end the war with us. And there was talk about this. This was both in Germany, also England itself. There was talk about this as well. What if Hitler gets some kind of peace treaty where England can continue to be independent and do its thing, but England recognizes German mastery of the rest of the European continent, essentially. Now, because Churchill is now in power, as you guys know, Churchill, and you guys read about some of this, right? So some of this is not new to you, right, from reading Tom Rick's book. But Churchill is having none of that, realizing what fascism, there's no way we can have some kind of peace treaty with Hitler and imagine that somehow that's going to hold and we'll be safe. And our way of life, our freedoms, our freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, or even freedom of thought is so well laid out by Ricks and Churchill and Orwell's fears of Nazi Germany, what fascism really means. Churchill realized there's no way we can live compatibly with Nazi Germany, and so the idea of negotiating some kind of peace settlement goes nowhere, and that means the Germans are going to try to force the issue with using the Luftwaffe or German Air Force to force England into capitulation. That leads famously to the Battle of Britain, as you guys know. Won't spend long on that. It's an epic battle. Love to spend a whole class or two on the Battle of Britain. It's fascinating. But after a lot of hard fighting, as you guys know, the Royal Air Force is not destroyed, and Germany loses its attempt to crush the Royal Air Force, which would have enabled it to potentially launch an invasion of England itself. But because the German Air Force lost this contest, and the Royal Air Force continued to be in good strength, this is one of the first, in fact, in many ways, the first major setback of German armies in World War II would be this one. There's some smaller ones, but this is probably the first major setback, or the first time the Germans wanted something and wanted it badly and failed to get it. There's some scenes from the fighting. Perhaps you guys have seen Darkest Hour. If you have not, I'll recommend it to you guys. An old classic movie, Battle of Britain, is also very good. Quite old, but still very good. All right. Reasons for German success. The Lightning War. So, why was Germany so successful? And I think I might wrap this video up after this one. Maybe I'll do a second one tomorrow because I don't want to make this video too long. We got some more to come here. In fact, I think I'll stop right here with this video here, and then I will record part 2 for you guys tomorrow on the first year of the war. So, hope you guys are all doing good. I hope you guys are getting now to the tail end of Rick's book. A lot of things I just mentioned to you guys all got a deeper look into them by reading Rick's book on Churchill. Churchill and the Battle of Britain. There's a lot of power in that that took place. So my 2-minute summary of the Battle of Britain, you guys got a much better and much more visceral connection to the peril facing Great Britain politically, economically, socially, and militarily, and all those in those very dark days of Great Britain facing really alone the might of Nazi Germany. And their desperate need for help from the United States, sensitivity of that, the incredibly important role Churchill made in putting iron into the soul of the British people to stand up and fight for their freedoms and their rights and their survival, frankly. So we better wrap it up right there. I'll have a follow-on video. We'll get to the second part of the first years of the war, but that'll be tomorrow. So I wish you guys all a good day, and we'll see you with the second part of the video after this one. So take care, everybody.